On today's episode, we interviewed Patrick O'Connell and really focused a lot more on kind of his advisory firm and really as a buyer, right? What are some of the things that you should look into? With a big focus on just kind of the quality of earnings. What is a quality of earnings, right? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things that go into putting that together? And then ultimately, really as a buyer, right? And as a seller, what are some of the conversations that happen or need to happen to help ensure a smooth transaction gets conducted? So, Casey, what were some of your takeaways?
Man, I think as a new buyer or somebody that has been in the space, but maybe didn't go through the private equity world and all that stuff, they've probably never understood what a quality of earnings really does or why you have to have it. And then the idea of getting somebody that's like a partner that's involved with you to help you think through why you're doing what you're doing, man, it's honestly priceless.
Yeah, no, it's timely too. Earlier today, coincidentally, I was having a conversation with Casey, and one of his big mistakes on his first transaction he did was not doing a quality of earnings. Right, you
Big
kind of
time.
get enamored in the thrill of the chase, but there's some mechanical, operational things that you need to be aware of and keep in mind in order to be able to complete a successful transaction.
And these things cost money,
Yeah.
right? But it's better than losing money in the backside. So it's a sunk cost, but it's got to be part of your repertoire and having a good person with you. So, anyways, Patrick seems like an incredible guy. Looks like what he does is a huge and great service for those of us in the Lord.
No, absolutely. And so, if you're a buyer trying to figure out, financial health of a business or trying to explain working capital to your seller, this is a podcast for you to listen to. Hey everybody, it's Feras and would love to see you at our upcoming M&A Launchpad conference in Chicago, October 26th. At a conference, we talk about what it looks like to value a business, how to buy a business, how do you manage a team, right? And ultimately, we're big believers in the buy then build concept. So we're going to have one of our friends, Walker Dybel, the author of Buy Then Build there, as well as one of our keynotes and many more. So we'd love to see you there to kind of get exposure to the space and network. On today's episode, we have Patrick. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Patrick. So you've done a tremendous amount of transactions, right? And maybe give a little bit of just an overview for your audience in terms of what have you done historically and kind of what's your focus on today?
Yeah, so for those who haven't met, my name is Patrick O'Connell. I am currently based in the Washington, D.C. area. My mission is to empower entrepreneurs, private equity, and small capital groups buy and sell Main Street and lower middle market deals. I've had the pleasure of working with hundreds of entrepreneurs and great business owners successfully navigate their businesses via an acquisition or ultimately an exit.
So you'd imagine like in that lower middle market space, right? Define what you call lower middle market. Everybody has these different definitions, right? But where do you really feel like your value kicks in that lower?
Yeah, so the quote unquote sandbox I find valuable and where I play and do conduct most of my deals is in that 3 to 20 million range, and that's on enterprise value.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so you're an advisory firm, right? And again, for you kind of alluded to a little bit as to what you do, but maybe give people just an example of what a stereotypical customer looks like, right? What do they come to you with? What problem? What are you helping them solve? What have you helped them accomplish?
Yeah, so I am a M&A accountant. So our primary core offering is through a quality of earnings analysis, whether it be a buyer or seller. Most of our clients we've had the pleasure of working with are buyers that either are leaving corporate America and are an independent sponsor or a small private equity group. They may have come from a larger private equity firm, stood up their own fund and want to buy specific businesses in B2B and technology-backed companies.
Yeah, and that quality of earnings it's just mission critical, right? I mean, we're going in, we're evaluating these companies. There's so many different things you're evaluating, but at the end of the day, the private credit lenders, the bank, everybody is going to rely on that quality of earnings, right?
Yeah, and you're cutting yourself short, right? If you're a buyer and you don't do a quality of earnings. And so I think, Patrick, I mean, maybe, give the audience a little bit of a deep dive. This is not a topic we've really talked about much. We always talk about quality of earnings as a thing, but what happens behind the scenes, right? For people to understand, like what exactly is an accounting team doing whenever they're creating their quality of earnings?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. At the highest level, without getting too granular for your audience, the objective of the quality of earnings is to trust but verify what the seller has told you about the business you'd like to buy compared to their recorded information. How is that achieved? It's achieved through various analysis, such as gaining access to the company's financial software, conducting several management meetings, and speaking with the team and understanding, are they applying the correct accounting principles in order to properly state the business? Because if there are pitfalls, you may be walking into a business where it looks profitable if you review a SIM or marketing materials, but in reality, it's actually not making much money, which could cause some serious concerns if you have a personal guarantee through an SBA loan, or you have, promised returns if you've raised capital from investors.
So Patrick, dive into that a little deeper. So okay, so the business, I'm looking at their tax returns, I'm doing my homework, and I'm like, man, this company's profitable. It's making money. You're talking to then all of a sudden I come to the Q of E. So what is that example that you find where you're like, hey guys, it's just not making money?
Yeah, so in the quality of earnings, there's a few key analysis. Ultimately, if there are certain one-time events, such as one-time revenues or one-time costs, that's not realistically expected on a go-forward basis. So what you may look at a 3-year marketing materials where the business is doing $1 million in reported EBITDA each year. If 33 or 25% of that is from a one-time customer, you could be at risk for a decline immediately in revenue of 25%. And when I mean revenue, I mean strictly profitability.
So that customer concentration is where you're getting at on that one, right? So you have this one-time customer this year, they made up 25% of your sales. And if you don't really dig in and find that, you're not going to know that.
That's correct.
And so for listeners, so customer concentration list is something you provide in the quality of earnings, right? Now, in addition to that, I mean, are you guys cross-referencing invoices? Are you speaking to customers? Are you guys, the real question is how ultimately accounting and financials are just numbers oriented, right? And maybe the question I have is outside of the numbers that are presented that me as a buyer, I can go look at those numbers myself also, right? What other activities are being done outside of that to help get a good understanding to the health of a business?
Yeah, and this will contradict, my accounting background being strictly numbers. Deals are more often than not human in nature than financial. When I think of a quality of earnings, I've had the pleasure of doing this for over a decade. Almost all of the significant deal findings come through lengthy discussions with management and owners. Once you unpack the numbers, and you need to be trained and have a trained eye to ask certain questions over and over again to extract, critical information about the business that the owner may not be presenting if you simply look at the numbers.
So I would imagine in a discussion. So right now, Feras and I are under LOI. We've started our Q of E with a group that we've used here. Part of that acquisition, there are no assets, right? It has a 2025 work in progress, the WIP, right? It's got all of these components into it, but it's more of a cash flow structure, right? So we've got to dig in on that Q of E. We don't, but the Q of E that we gauge is to look at that, the work in progress, look at those contracts, all of that good stuff. So we can understand, is that true cash flow? Is it going to be there next year, right? So what do you think in that regards, in that kind of a conversation, when you look at a business that doesn't have a lot of assets, has a lot of contracts, big contracts in the future, when you look at it from a quality of earnings standpoint, how are you digging into something like that?
Casey should have told me that we're going to get free consultation advice. I should have brought my list of questions here.
Hey, we're going to take what we can, right?
Yeah, and it's a great topic. Without scaring you, work in process, percent of completion, these are complicated accounting areas which are easily manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
Are they manipulated in your deal? Hopefully not. The way a good Q of E provider verifies is they review how their, the accounting methodology behind it. And based on the discussions with management about how they invoice, how they, will adjust as the projects are completed, you verify, is it actually how they record it? Because there are several instances where it could be easily manipulated. And at the surface level, it looks like there might be revenue when in reality, there could be discrepancies.
Very good. And you're not going to scare us. We're totally, we understand completely.
Yeah.
That's part of the game, right? You go through these things. So when you work with the client, and you've talked to somebody and that stuff, when you talk to them, what is your biggest value to them when they say, hey, why would I do Q of E with you than with one of these big accounting firms like Ernst & Young or one of these bigger groups? Why would they come and do business with your side?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack. I would say the value proposition we bring is you get Big Four quality due diligence at a fraction of the price with no red tape. I spent the bulk of my career in those large transaction firms. learning from the best and brightest. Unfortunately, gaining access to those national firms comes with a significant cost.
Yes.
Dead deal fees are serious, especially in times of uncertainty. There's never a guarantee deals will close. So ultimately, that's our value proposition. And you get that direct access into a specialist who focuses on those B2B and technology backed companies, really, to best serve your deal.
No, I think it's great because you've got to have, every deal is a little, every deal is different. The structures are different, how we look at the difference. But having that arsenal to know that most people are going to lead you if you're going through your first quality of earnings, they're going to say, oh man, you need to go to this big firm and you're going to pay. You pay for it. You pay out the nose. And we were fortunate on our first transaction we did together last year, $20 million acquisition. We did the quality of earnings with more of a regional based group, and still it's quite expensive. So if somebody's doing their first acquisition or as an independent sponsor, they don't realize that this third party due diligence is very serious cost, right? It's nice to have that person or that group that they can go to and know, hey, it's not going to, you're not going to knock their head off, right? But you're going to come in and you're really going to act as a consultant on their side to help them uncover all of that uncertainty around the financial stuff.
Yeah, and maybe I'll expand that a little bit too, right? Big four, they're going to be very crisp as to, hey, here's exactly what you're getting, versus with a boutique shop or a smaller shop, right? It's more about, hey, helping you, buy the right business and understanding what you're buying, right? Like the big four does not want to give you general feedback like, hey, I spoke to the management. They all seem very shady, right? Like that's something that, Patrick, you probably would tell a client, right? You're ultimately there as kind of almost a fiduciary for your client, and you're trying to give them, everything you're assessing, versus the big four are going to be very stringent on like what they want their staff to say or not say. So something to think about.
And you're absolutely correct. Like my value proposition is to be that dynamic QFE provider who acts more like a non-equity deal partner. I have several tough conversations with clients where I break down the numbers and say, look, you're not going to be able to meet your debt service. Here's how much you're going to pay if you use an SBA loan. The business is not generating enough money. We can either walk away from the deal, restructure it. So not only am I doing quality of earnings, I'm doing purchase price agreements, working capital, discussions at close. So I like to think of myself as that deal advisor with that CPA hat to conduct your due diligence.
Yeah. So actually give some examples, right, of things that tough conversations you've had with clients, right? Why, what happened? And then the next thing I kind of wanted to dive in on is outside of, we kind of obviously focus this so far on quality of earnings, but outside of that, right, what are the other tangible benefits that you're able to provide in kind of steering a deal?
Yeah. So where I add the most value is in those working capital discussions. On a deal, I worked with an excellent buyer in July of 2024. Right now it's about October 1st of 24. The working capital he negotiated was not going to cover the business needs on day one of close. How did I unpack that? Through 5 or 6 discussions with the current owners and understanding what does the cash flow needs of the business look like on a 30, 60, and 90-day window. Ultimately, it was determined that the business needed about $300,000 in working capital to continue the business operations on day one as the new owner assumed duties. In the LOI, after I reviewed it, they actually only negotiated for $150,000. So when we neared closing, I brought this up with my buyer and said, look, if the seller is unwilling to negotiate and give you a larger amount of working capital, you need to have a line of credit ready before you close. Because often, as I'm sure you guys know, after you close, it can be challenging to get access to those funds. And I've actually spoken with searchers who have gotten into that cash crunch, and some of the businesses have folded in the first 90 days because they just ran out of money.
No, it's a huge point. And I'll tell you, one of the number one conversations that we had last year on our acquisition we closed, it was net working capital. It was the discussion. We went to the table 10 times. And the quality of earnings did define for that. We did a working capital analysis and we all agreed on that. The current deal we're working on, it's the same thing, right? It's like, I will only give you guys 10% trailing 12 sales number. Okay, great. But let's validate everything with the quality of earnings, right? Let's let that settle. And I think that that's a great point because anyone and everyone doing a deal, it seems like working capital is the most difficult part of the negotiation. It's really hard to forecast. Like for a buyer, we get hard to forecast like what we think our performance is going to look like. We may not ask the right questions to uncover that, hey, oh my God, 150 is not going to get me there. I need 300. And so that QOV is like mission critical. And then to have somebody on their side to be able to be looking for those things, because that first 90 days is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And the thing I think for listeners to realize too, most sellers are not sophisticated. They probably don't even understand what working capital is. Right. So it's about not only you as the buyer trying to educate them, right? Which again, you're going to be biased. That's how the seller is going to look at it. It's having professionals to kind of explain it. I mean, even in our transaction, even the person's attorney was really like not getting what working capital is. And it took a lot of education to get them all aligned on, hey, this business needs a lot of cash sitting in it just to even operate day to day. And so again, it's a very, very important point, but just realize you're probably working with someone unsophisticated, and you have to really explain it to them and get someone like an accountant with a QOV to help walk a seller through it and explain what is working capital, why is it necessary to stay in the business, what happens if you don't leave it in the business, and then how does it tie to the valuation of the business. So
it's a sunk cost. Like you've got to spend it. Like it doesn't matter if you're buying a small business, the littlest thing or whatever. I mean, you got to do it. And I did not do it on my first acquisition I did in 2019. I did not do a quality of earnings. And boy, man, it might have been a game changer for everything if I would have done. But when we did our deal, it was required by the bank. It had a lot of these other stuff. But when I did a small SBA deal, it was a $5 million purchase. No one required the QOV, right? So we did our own financial analysis. We did our stuff. Man, we missed so much. And a QOV would have given me a lot of that. You asked me today, what happened? Like, where were some of the challenges? I'm like, that was one of them. I tried to not spend the money up front, and that upfront money would have saved us tons in the back.
Yeah. And you guys say a lot of points. Obviously I agree with them. And, my goal of sharing findings is not to cram the quality of earnings down people's throats. I certainly understand these things are not cheap, but it's more of a risk reward standpoint. If you're personally guaranteeing a business, I mean, your entire net worth is on the line. So what's that worth to you? A lot of people have different definitions. You could buy a business without a quality of earnings and it could be fine. I would say the chances are more often than not that won't be the case, in my opinion. So you're better off, you would hardly ever buy a home without an inspection. It's effectively buying 5 homes without 5 inspections.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
An odds game. You're more often than not going to be worse off if you did not get it.
Yeah, a lender's not going to give you a commercial real estate loan without an MAI appraisal. Like there's all these things that you have to do in order to get there. In this space, especially if you're buying with an SBA loan, these things aren't required, right? That you think in your mind, okay, the lender's done their due diligence. They're giving me a loan. They must have seen the numbers. They must have looked at it. No, they're checking boxes, right? If you don't dig into that stuff and do that homework, it will come back to bite you. And like you said, you've seen people go bust in 90 days after close.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many dynamics. And I guess to your first point about these sellers, a lot of these sellers, and selling your business is scary. Like we need to think a lot of switching back to the personal level, like these deals are scary. You need to give them comfort and empathy throughout the process. Just because they don't understand what working capital is, if you partner with a good advisor, we jump on the phone and I talk about it. It's not over email. They could be in person because these are serious discussions. And if you don't get them comfortable with the idea of what's the end goal, you can explain what working capital is without even using the words. It's effectively, what is the money I need to fuel the business in the first 30 days? If you get pushback and say, oh, I don't understand. And you would say, if you were buying a business, wouldn't you want some runway to continue the growth? Like, how am I going to pay the employees? So partnering with someone experienced in the space, in my opinion, is just tremendous value.
Yeah, no, I think 75% of a transaction is just getting comfort with a seller. I mean, literally, we had that on a deal recently. And, as Casey likes to say, we had to go belly to belly with a seller, right? And just really spend the time and not even talk about the business, just build rapport with these people, right? because that leads to trust, and that leads to being able to bring in an expert, and that person is trusted. It's not like, because sellers go in and it's the biggest, most sellers, it's the biggest transaction of their life, easily, right? Bigger than a house, bigger than anything else they've ever done in their life. And so they're going to go in with shields up, right? And you have to figure out how to slowly disarm that and kind of work through it and really get alignment. And then you can start to educate them on some of the mechanics. And so,
yeah, we're also the group that we'll spend as long as we need to spelling out the LOIs, right? Like we just want to make sure that everybody can agree on how it's going to work, right? Or even to the seller, we go like, hey, you realize if you're seller carrying, right? This is the first lien. Our equity sits here. We have, we go through and spell it out, because the last thing you want to do is close, sign paperwork, and go, oh shit, you didn't disclose this to me.
Right. Yeah. And you guys are stealing a lot of my good lines. I always say the deals will take as long as they need to take in order to come around. It could be 1 month. It could be 6 months. These things should not be rushed, because once it's signed, it's a lot more complicated to get out.
So true, man.
No, this requires patience. It's not, I'm used to commercial real estate, and it's very transactional. You get an LOI, you get a PSA signed a week later, and then 60 days you're closed, versus in this space, even the LOI doesn't really mean much, right? And so you have to be patient. And I say that to everybody that's looking to buy. Being patient and not rushing things, including like not pressuring the seller, right? You have to be very tactful with sellers and help get them to come to the conclusion that you want them to, right? But it's not going to be done by forcing them. So shifting gears, maybe one last question before we kind of get to the end, Patrick. what are some of the other big pitfalls you see people make that just if you were to list out, hey, here are 4 or 5 other common mistakes people make that they should just keep in mind, right, if they're listening to this podcast?
Yeah, a lot of common mistakes are, we just touched on it, rushing through the process. It takes a long time to fully analyze who is the owner that you're buying the business from, what's the business look like, and are you an equipped owner or capital group that can buy this business and scale it? No one wants to buy a business and have it go belly up. There is any good business purchase has been an equitable trade from buyer and seller. So rushing the process is definitely one. 2 is doing this alone. I've spoken with searchers who have bought a business completely on their own, and they just miss things. 2 heads are better than 1. 10 heads are better than 2. Align yourself with a partner, advisor, maybe not a significant other, because they may be biased, but that independent third party who can shake you if you're going to make a big mistake, or you're just overlooking something because you have bias towards the investment.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that one. And it doesn't have to be somebody that's going to agree with you, right? You want somebody that's not going to agree to you. Because on my first transaction I did solo. And the couple people I went through an advisory were more like soft, like, I think it looks great, good job. But no one really said, hey, let me tell you what the worst part here is, or what this problem's going to have. And it would have been best to go find somebody that had been in that space, like an advisor. Like, those things are hindsight, but very critical. I couldn't agree with you more. This is a big investment, and most people's biggest investment they'll ever make, not their home. You're buying a business.
It's so true. To that point, I love the entrepreneurial spirit of buying businesses and kind of charting your future. I'm an entrepreneur by nature, but I often will present a red flags and key findings report, which is not positive. You need to know the skeletons in the closet before you buy the business, to the extent possible. Obviously, once you assume duties as a new owner, you'll have that full lens. But I like to lay out all the facts to some of the wonderful entrepreneurs I work with, and arm them with as much knowledge as possible to say, hey, is this the business for me?
All right. Love it, man. That is great advice. And again, before we jump into we'll get all your information, all that good stuff for everybody, because it is a very big piece of this deal. Of all the deals.
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. So let's move on to our rocket round. We'll ask guests the same 3 questions. So you ready, Patrick?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. First question: what do you like to do in your free time?
Free time, relaxing at home, and either that or I'm on the golf course.
See, that is
the golfer.
See, I do not know anything about golfing, and I need to, because I'm clearly in the wrong industry if I don't. So.
I'm on the golf course every weekend, but it's not me playing; it's my daughter. So I get to live vicariously through her.
That might be better. Some bad golf days,
being that parent that's like frustrated for it's so tough. It's emotions everywhere. You feel it for them. All right, second question. So, what's your most memorable moment in your business journey?
My most memorable moment is when I left corporate America and launched O'Connell Advisor Group. You know, jumping into entrepreneurship is a scary thing. About two and a half years later, it's been the best decision of my life for my family, as well as, I get to meet so many just excellent people I probably would never have come across, like you guys in corporate America.
No, I mean, yeah, you're in a very much a shell in corporate American. I mean, that's what I love about the space. There's a lot of cool people doing a lot of really cool things and being willing to share and help and partner. And it's hard to partner with somebody whenever you have a day job, right? Like you have to get the whole company's partnered, and that's its own problem. So definitely feel you on that. And so, last but not least, what is your favorite tool or resource?
My tool or resource in the business buying community would be leveraging other entrepreneurs. I'm pretty active on X, which is new for me. There is a ton of free resources just by speaking with people and, the content shared. I always say you could probably learn more being active on social media and learning from business buyers or entrepreneurs than getting an MBA for,
huge.
A cost of $0 and 0 cents.
Yeah, no, we've and there's been several of our interviewers that have said X. That's one of their places. It's a great community. I'm off and on. But I'm a LinkedIn guy, but it's just not as active. You know what I mean? So I've got to dive in like you did. So you just jump in and start getting into it recently?
Yeah. So I would be lying if I said I wasn't encouraged by a client. He told me about it in January of 24. He said, "Hey man, I've seen your stuff on LinkedIn. You're wasting your time. You need to get onto X. This is kind of the place for you for that." Just that deeper connection. Again, these buying businesses are scary. You need to get off of the surface level and really dive deep into people's personalities. So anyway, long story short, been there for about 9 months and I've met hundreds of great people.
Nice.
It's interesting to me how odd or how big the audience is on X, specifically for small and medium businesses, right? That space, it's just the community lives there. It doesn't live in any other channel platforms. It lives there. And, talking to people like Clint Fiore, who built his whole audience and his whole following just by doing that and doing it well. And so, for any of those listening, there's a very, very, very rich ecosystem on X or Twitter. So definitely go check it out.
Yeah. And to your point, I did a X Space, which is just a soft platform. Almost think of it like radio for X with Bruce Marks. And we had like over 300 listeners just on a random Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Hey, that's awesome.
Very awesome.
The space is exploding.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Patrick,
great advice.
Thank you very much for kind of all the information. So I guess if someone from the audience wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Yeah, so the best way, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or X. My handle is SMB Deal Guy. Love to connect with you if you're an entrepreneur looking to buy a business, or if you're a business owner thinking about, hey, I need an exit plan. I need an exit strategy. I would love to work with you. And, very, very active on both platforms. And I would love to hear help where I can.
Awesome. Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, Patrick, man, I'm really excited that you joined us today. It has been very knowledgeable. I hope listeners got that. It's just that it's the one thing we're talking all the time. It's like, how do we validate the numbers? What do we do? It is the nature of the business.
Couldn't agree more.
All right.
I love partnering with entrepreneurs in their journey, and really it's a trust but verify. Just to buy excellent businesses, you just need a little bit of help.
Yep. Big time.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.